Underneath the shine of every golden age, there's a quiet truth most people miss. Wealth has never been safe. Not in empires at their peak. Not during revolutions. Not even in the supposedly stable decades between wars. From the palaces of Babylon to the villas of ancient Rome, the wealthy have always played a different game. They understood something ordinary people rarely did. Money was never just money. Whether it took the form of gold, grain, land, or debt, wealth was leverage. It was protection. It was survival. While most people trusted the system, the elite learned how to protect themselves from the system. So the real question isn't how they became rich. The real question is how they stayed rich when everything around them was falling apart. To understand that, we have to go back to the earliest examples of concentrated wealth, a time when being rich didn't mean a large bank balance, but control over resources no one else could easily reach. 4,000 years before Christ, in the city-states of Mesopotamia, the wealthiest merchants and rulers didn't simply lock silver away in vaults. They embedded it into temple loans, farmland leases, and trade monopolies stretching across rivers and deserts. In cities like Ur and Lagash, wealth was intertwined with religion. Temples weren't just places of worship. They were the central banks of the ancient world. To seize temple wealth wasn't just a political act. It was a religious offense, and that made elite fortunes untouchable. Ancient Egypt followed a similar logic. Pharaohs and their courts stored wealth not in currency but in durable assets. Fertile land along the Nile, massive grain reserves, and gold mines in Nubia. These weren't assets you could confiscate without destabilizing the entire state. By dedicating land to temple estates, elites ensured their wealth would pass safely to future generations. In a world where food meant survival, land was the ultimate store of value. By the 5th century before Christ, Greek merchants developed another strategy: mobility. Traders in Athens, Corinth, and across the Aegean understood that political change could erase wealth overnight. So they spread their assets across multiple city-states, invested in ships and cargo, and built financial relationships in ports as far away as Egypt and the Black Sea. If one city fell, they could start again somewhere else. It wasn't secrecy, it was physical diversification. Rome refined this idea even further. Senators, generals, and the wealthy equestrian class lived with constant political risk. They saw confiscations, purges, and fortunes destroyed simply for backing the wrong side. Their response was strategic. They bought land in multiple provinces. They invested in tax collection contracts. They lent money to foreign kings, knowing repayment was backed by Roman power. In modern terms, they weren't just diversifying assets, they were diversifying jurisdictions. As the Western Roman Empire declined, this strategy became even clearer. As the state weakened, elites shifted wealth away from public finance and into private control. Fortified estates, private armies, and direct trade networks. When Rome finally fell in 476, the imperial treasury was empty. But the richest families still controlled land, food, and labor. The state disappeared. Their wealth did not. In the medieval world, new tools emerged. Wealthy families used the church as both a bank and a shield. Property donated to religious institutions was largely protected from seizure, even when kings needed money for war. Later, banking families like the Medici combined this with bills of exchange, early financial instruments that allowed wealth to move across borders without moving gold. A merchant could lose everything in one city and remain wealthy in another because his capital lived on ledgers, not in chests. Across the Islamic world, merchants relied on trust-based systems like hawala, which allowed money to move without physical transfer. Wealth tied to reputation and networks was far harder for rulers to seize. Once again, the principle was the same: spread risk, reduce visibility, and keep assets beyond the reach of any single authority. As centralized states grew stronger in the early modern era, the elite adapted again. Merchant families in Venice, Amsterdam, and London tied their fortunes to the state itself, but in a way that gave them leverage. They financed wars, bought government debt, and supplied navies. This made them too valuable to confiscate. Crises that crushed ordinary people often expanded elite influence. So what do all these examples tell us? That protecting wealth has always been about two things: control and distance. Control means holding assets that produce value regardless of politics. Distance means spreading those assets across systems, places, and forms, so no single event can wipe everything out. The wealthy of the past understood something many still ignore today. Wealth stored entirely inside the official system is wealth at risk. And that lesson matters more than ever. Today, assets can be frozen with a keystroke. Currencies can be devalued overnight. Markets can collapse in days. Inflation can quietly drain purchasing power year after year. The tools have changed, but the risk hasn't. The ancient elite didn't wait for disaster before acting. They prepared early. They spread risk. They secured long-term value. That's the real meaning of financial freedom. Not just having money, but making sure it survives the storms. If this gave you a new perspective, subscribe. History has the answers. I'll show you where to look.